So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
I can't floss my teeth, man. I can't get into the flossing thing. People who smoke cigarettes, they say, man, you don't know how hard it is to quit smoking. Yes, I do. It's as hard as it is to start flossing. You seem jittery. Yeah, I'm about to floss.
Good morning. It is Monday, Moral Monday, August the 11th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and moral politics. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, Ashley Webster's subbing for Stu Varney.
Everybody, I'm Ashley Webster, filling in today for Stuart Varney. So here's a question for you. Will the feds take over the running of Washington, D.C.? In the next hour, President Trump promises a news conference that will stop violent crime in the nation's capital. The president has also told homeless people in D.C. to get out of town. So where do they go? We'll get into that. All eyes will be on Alaska later this week as Trump and Putin discuss a way to end the war in Ukraine. We'll talk about that as well. We're also waiting, by the way, for some key inflation data this week that could have a big impact on interest rates, depending on what levels they come in. As for the markets, looking for a modestly higher start to the week, flat to slightly higher, although the NASDAQ is finished at record territory at the end of last week. Any gains today will be another record, but as you can see, Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ slightly higher. Let's take a look at the 10-year yield, essentially flat at 4.27%. Let's take a look at the 2-year yield, see where that is. Again, flat, 3.77%. Now, Bitcoin has been a big story. It is now at 119,593, up about $2,600. The record is just north of 123,000. So maybe it will get there. We'll see. Take a look at the price of oil, just up ever so slightly, 34 cents at 64.21 a barrel. Gold, after being on a tear, falling to its lowest level in 3 months, down 78 bucks at 34.13 per troy ounce. And take a look at Nvidia and AMD. Both companies agreeing to give the U.S. government 15% of the revenues from chip sales in China. Quite an unusual arrangement. We'll talk about that. Also ahead in the show, China facing a trade deadline that runs out tomorrow. Are we close to a deal? We'll get into it. We're also going to show you how robots could be called in to help Los Angeles rebuild after the wildfires. That's right. Robots. We'll see what that's about. It is Monday, August the 11th, 2025.
And that is Ashley Webster. So again, Stuart Varney couldn't be bothered to show up for work. So we're stuck with a substitute. Non-profit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Media Buzz.
Ahead, we'll talk to State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce about the Trump-Putin summit meeting, and Karl Rove is on deck in Texas about the heated redistricting war there. President Trump's sky-high tariffs just took effect in 90 countries, sparking a debate about whether consumers will be hit with higher prices or whether this will boost American manufacturing. That has brought the media's white-hot spotlight back to the economy and whether the president is mishandling some disappointing news by going on offense. Let's face it, no one had heard of Erica McIntyre until about 10 minutes ago. But when she announced a weak jobs number, 73,000, for the month of July, President Trump fired her, saying the Biden appointee had rigged the numbers to make him and the Republicans look bad. He offered no proof for this charge, but will her successor's numbers be trusted under the circumstances?
I believe the numbers were phony, just like they were before the election, and there were other times. So you know what I did? I fired her.
Joe Kernan is usually a pro-Trump voice on CNBC. He fact-checked the president on his charge of phony numbers.
Where do you get the notion that it's rigged, or do you have any evidence there?
It is antiquated, but it's also very political. And, I had an election recently where I did very well, won every swing state, won the popular vote, won everything, all right?
Trump's BLS commissioner in the first term, Bill Beach, is highly critical.
I don't think there's any grounds at all for this firing, and it really hurts the statistical system. It undermines credibility in BLS.
Trump's informal economic advisor, Stephen Moore, brought happier numbers, saying the average median family income for the first 5 months of the year is up $1,174, which the president pronounced incredible. Some in the media are saying Trump's suspicion of the BLS figures are justified.
You can't be surprised that people look at this and they see these errors and they so often go in one direction, especially over the past 4 years under the Biden administration. They kept going in one, helping before the election, and then the revision would turn out to actually lower the numbers for jobs.
Democrats are going haywire. No big surprise there. And media liberals say the president went too far.
So firing one department head in order to censor the truth is bad enough on its own. But it speaks to a larger political project by this White House and this administration. Donald Trump does not want you to know the truth.
We may just get new people installed at the Bureau of Labor Statistics whose orders are bring down inflation, bring down that number.
Now, the same goes for monthly revisions, which in this case downgraded the previous 2 months by 258,000, which Trump also calls phony. But the economy hasn't changed. And despite the media and political warfare, and what most pundits are failing to realize is that even negative coverage helps him drive the media agenda, shifting the focus to whether the process has been fair. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
So there you go, Media Buzz. Back in a minute. Thank you. So on the Media Buzz segment that I just played for you, the issue here is revision. The game that they play, and remember the guy that's on Media Buzz is a lefty. He comes to Fox from MSNBC. And he's a lefty, and his show displays that leftiness. Anyhow, his trick here is to leave something out. He says, well, the numbers, but it's the revision of the numbers. That's what the lady did that got her fired. She revised the numbers and revised them downward. Revised them in a way that benefited her former boss, Joe Biden, and works against her current boss, Donald Trump, President Trump. So, and I've said this before, by the way, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the numbers that come out are always political because it's part of an administration. So you should take whatever it is they're putting out with a grain of salt. Anyways, that's the point, is the revision, but they leave that out. And they say, oh, the numbers. He doesn't like the numbers, so he fires people in government, and that he demands that that they report numbers that are going to be lowering inflation or whatever. That's a flat-out lie. They're just flat-out lying. And the worst part of it is they're gaslighting. They're pretending to be neutral while lying to the American public. And I'm talking about Mr. Kurtz on Media Buzz and the other talking heads that he put in there. They're lying to the American people. They know that they're lying, but they pretend to be neutral. And remember, the gaslighting, the key word is pretend. Somebody pretending to be something that they're not is gaslighting. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Dr. Berg.
So the question is, what would actually happen to your body if you really gave up sugar, completely, for 2 weeks? Let's take a look at that. Number one, you are going to lose your appetite to sugar. Why? Because every time you consume sugar, a hormone comes in there and pushes your blood sugars down, causing a low blood sugar situation, hypoglycemia to some degree, and that is going to cause you to crave sugar. So by getting rid of sugar, you get rid of the craving for sugar. Number two, you're going to be less hungry. Until you do this, you won't really fully know, but I'm telling you, it's the sugar that keeps you hungry all the time. When you give up the sugar, you become a lot less hungry. Why? Because you stabilize your blood sugars. And now your cells can be actually fed, because when you're living on sugar, because sugar is toxic to the body starts rejecting it. That's called insulin resistance. So the body is blocking insulin because that controls sugar, and what your body's really trying to do is limit the amount of sugar inside the cells. So the body doesn't consider it a good thing, it's a bad thing. So when you give it up, this thing can reverse, and not only can you now absorb proper amounts of fuel, you'll absorb nutrients a lot better too, because insulin resistance also blocks nutrients, minerals, vitamins, and that's one of the functions of insulin. All right, number 3, you're going to have less fatigue, especially after eating a meal. When you're eating sugar on a regular basis, usually you're going to be tired after you eat, and that is a blood sugar thing. But you're going to find that you're no longer going to be that tired after you eat. It just means that now you're no longer having higher sugar, which basically makes the brain tired. It's normal sugar, and now your brain can be awake. All right, number 4, you're going to lose excessive water and fat. For the first week, you're going to dump a lot of water and some fat, but after that, it's going to be more and more fat. You're going to be surprised how much fluid you were retaining. Some people within 1 week can lose about 13 pounds of fluid. They're holding that fluid around, and that can't be that healthy for the heart. Of course, you're going to see your clothes loosening, especially around the midsection. Your gut, your waist is one of the best indicators to tell if you're doing too much sugar. If you reduce the sugar, the stomach shrinks. If you eat the sugar, your stomach will expand. Okay? Number 5, enhanced mood. So if you were grouchy before, you're now going to be a lot calmer, less stressed, and you're going to be actually nice to be around. Okay? That's good. Also, your cognitive function will improve. So you're going to feel more focused. You're going to have more concentration. You'll be less ADD, more attention to focus on your projects. Okay, number 6, your skin is going to look much better. You're going to have less acne. Your skin's going to glow. And that's just a reflection of what happens when you consume sugar. Your insulin goes up, and also the hormone androgens, and we're talking about females, androgen will go up, and that's going to create acne. In a male body, the increased insulin will lower testosterone, so you're going to have other problems that are associated with low testosterone. All right, number 7, you'll have less stiffness. So you're going to have less inflammation. You're going to have less pain. So what's happening is all we're doing is we're converting your fuel from sugar to fat. It takes 3 days, okay, of cutting down the carbohydrates and the sugar. You may have a worsening of the symptoms for 3 days, okay? Guys, anyone can actually handle 3 days. And if you took some B vitamins from nutritional yeast and some potassium, you probably won't have any symptoms. So it's going to be relatively easy. At the cellular level, you're building new enzymes to run your body off fat fuel. Okay, that's what's happening. You have little machines that are literally changing over to a different fuel source. That's what's happening over these 2 weeks. You're getting decreased inflammation in your arteries. Okay, that's what's happening when you get off sugar. Less inflammation. It's going to help you in the long run prevent a clot or plaquing and help reduce the risk of a stroke and a heart attack. Also, you'll start growing brain cells. Why? Because when you reduce sugar, then you run your body on a different source of fuel called ketones. And ketones support the growth of nerve cells. All right, next one, the liver. You're going to start dumping some of this fat that's been accumulating in your liver, and you can use that as fuel. So you're on your way to cleaning out the liver so it's no longer fatty. By the way, as a side note, if you have a large belly, chances are you have a fatty liver. Okay, so by doing this, you will reduce the fat inside your liver. And lastly, you're going to have better kidney function. Take a look at a diabetic. The kidney is the target for problems. When you actually cut down the amount of sugar, reduce the carb, you're going to improve kidney function greatly. All right, guys, there you have it. You may want to try this. The proof's in the pudding. Maybe I shouldn't talk about pudding, but this is the icing on the cake. Now, maybe I shouldn't even talk about that. All right, thanks for watching.
And that was Dr. Berg. And I like Dr. Berg's channel. It's a YouTube channel, Dr. Eric Berg, DC. And I like him because he's about solutions. And I like to think that my podcast is more about solutions than problems. Back in a minute. And now a little bit of motivation.
And because they fought through all of that, they get to enjoy all of the money, all of the support, all of the love, all of the success that I know you want to reach. And if you want to get to that level, you got to become relentless and not allow any of the painful things turn you around.
It's in these trenches that legends are made, where you mold yourself into the titan you're meant to be. You don't just survive the storm. You learn to dance in the fucking rain, to take those hits and keep moving forward, to get rejected over and over and keep moving forward, driven by the raw, unyielding desire to see your dream realized, doing whatever it takes, paying whatever price. You keep grinding and keep fighting, because you know, on the other side of this hell is the life you've been fucking fighting for.
If I can take it, I can make it. If you can take it, you can make it.
If you can just keep believing when nothing in you is working, when all your external forces have given way, if you can just manage to somehow keep hoping, you have a chance. You just can't become hopeless. If you can just keep hope alive, you can make it. Because if you keep hoping, it is really faith. You just got to transpose it into I hope this happened to I believe this can happen.
Life is like a grindstone. It can polish you or it can pulverize you, depending on how you position yourself.
There's one side of pain that's the suffering and the discomfort side of pain. But then there's another side of pain that's called effort. It's called glory. It's called if you can find a way to push through pain, there's something greater on the other side of it.
Every time you find yourself saying that you can't do something, putting yourself down, being negative about you and the possibilities for you, you've got to literally catch yourself. And you've got to affirm to yourself, hey, no, I can make it. There's some way this can happen for me. You've got to remind yourself that you've got powers within you, talents within you that you haven't even reached for yet. That once you give yourself an opportunity to try and to experiment with your life, to stretch, you'll find out you can do more than you can ever begin to imagine. You've got to say yes. Yes to my dreams. Yes to me. Yes, I can. Doesn't matter how many failures I've made. Doesn't matter how many mistakes I've endured. Doesn't matter about what I've done. I can make it.
I don't know one motherfucker that is successful that doesn't take inventory of every fucking comment that anybody has ever made to them. Every time somebody doubts them, they get fucking pissed. And when they get pissed, they go out and do productive things. They don't dwell. They don't sit at home crying their beer. They go to the gym. They get their business plan together. They do whatever it takes to smash people in the fucking mouth with their progress. Build the kind of life that says I told you so without having to say a fucking word. It's about taking what people say you can't do and shoving it down their motherfucking throat. 100 to fucking nothing. That's how I operate. And that's how you should be thinking about it too. Effort is isolated. Nobody can dictate. Effort is 100% in the mind. Don't give in. Don't be like everybody else. Don't give up. Don't settle because things are hard. Don't let people talk you into their life. Become stronger. Become better. Become faster. Become smarter. Become more productive.
When life staggers you, the thing that'll get you up on your knees and keep on fighting is it's possible. If I just stand long enough, I can pull this off. I can do it. I'm putting it out here. I'm not going to rest until I have it. It's necessary. I'm going to do it. Because whatever you have to do, it's worth it because it's your life's purpose. And once you know that, it is done.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, the fundamental principle of capitalism is the separation of state and economics, that is, the liberation of men's economic activities of production and trade from any form of intervention, coercion, compulsion, regulation, or control by the government. This is the essence of capitalism, which is implicit in its theory and in the operation of a free market, unquote. And that was Ayn Rand from the chapter The Intellectual Bankruptcy of Our Age from the book The Voice of Reason. But she's wrong here. The fundamental principle of capitalism is neutrality. The government is a neutral third party, and its job is to settle disputes between parties. So I'm a businessman, you're a businessman, and we have an issue, maybe with contract dispute. We go to court. We let the government solve it or help us solve it. That is the essence of capitalism. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Jeffrey Mead.
We'll pick up 5 seats with the consent of the people. And that's the difference between the approach we're taking and the approach they're taking. We're doing it on a temporary basis. We're doing it in a fully transparent way. And we're doing it by asking the people of the state of California for their consent and support.
I find it interesting because he talks as if they're so moral and so just and they're just responding. But here are some interesting facts about California that he won't tell you. And let's compare these facts to Texas. I think we can all agree that California is the Democratic stronghold and Texas is the Republican stronghold. Now pay attention to this because this is going to be interesting and also telling. So in Texas, 56.1% of the voters voted for Trump and 42.5% of the voters voted for Kamala Harris. Now let's look at how this breaks down when it comes to the House of Representatives. 65.8% of the representatives are Republicans and 34.2% of the representatives are Democrats. The average difference here between who people voted for compared to the amount of representation they're getting in the House is about 9%. Now, let's go to California. 58.5% of voters voted for Kamala Harris, and 38.3% of voters voted for Donald Trump. Okay, so we know 58.5% of the voters in California voted for Kamala Harris. 82.7% of the representatives in the House in California are Democrats. 82%. Republicans have 17.3% of the seats. So the average difference here is 22.6%. And when I say this difference, I mean the discrepancy from what people vote for compared to what representation they're actually getting. Remember, right now, 82% of the representatives in California are Democrat. And the governor's talking about adding 5 more seats at the cost of Republican representation. So after the redistricting he's proposing, Democrats would have 92% of the representatives in that state, when almost 40% of the state votes for Republicans. And these are the people who talk about voters being disenfranchised and all these different things. These people act like they're all moral and virtuous. No, they care about winning. That is it. They want to win. Do not buy what they are selling. They simply want to win and they want power. We are the fastest growing channel in Substack. If you look above.
And that was Jeffrey Mead. One thing that he's not doing, again, he's speaking to, and I'm sure he's absolutely right about his statistics, but he's again preaching to the choir. The good idea is to tell Democrats why it is that they should be opposed to what it is that Governor Newsom is doing. Because in the state of California, it's owned by the Democrats, whether we like it or not. So you have to get them on board if you're going to affect any change whatsoever. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, what does the phrase, if you're explaining you're losing, mean in debates? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. from the perspective of your audience. If you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, when you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, then you continue to expel words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I heard on the radio about regarding the federalization of law enforcement in Washington, D.C., that there's a lawsuit afoot. Make no mistake that the lawsuit is fundamentally about government rights. This is going to come down. How this is going to turn out, it's going to depend on which judges it ends up in the end. If it goes in front of a Democrat judge, then the government will have rights, and meaning that the Washington, D.C. mayor and council, city council, will have the ability to decide how to meet their authority and responsibility without the interference of Donald Trump, President Trump, or if it ends up in front of a Republican, and a Republican will then decide that it is only the people that have rights and that the government has no right to be irresponsible. And so that's the way this is going to go. It's all about, make no mistake, it's all about dueling rights. And as I've said before, we cannot live in a society with dueling rights. At some point, something has to give. We either have government rights, in which case we have a dictatorship, or we have the people have rights and the government has none. The people have all the rights, the people and the government has none, in which case we have a democratic republic. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Back in a minute. Thank you. So listening to John Cobelt, and he's whining and complaining again about the governor and about the price of gas. And he's saying in Mississippi it's $2 and so many cents, and over here it's $2 and blah, 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 blah. And woe is me, in California we're paying $3-4 a gallon, and whining and complaining about what a bad governor the governor is. And he's stupid. John Cobelt is, because he could be much more influential than what he is if he would simply quit preaching to the choir, quit talking about the reasons that conservatives or would-be conservatives should be upset with the governor, and start explaining why it is Democrats should be upset with him. Okay? Then he's going to have maximum amount of influence. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from a book that's called Good Inside. What's the opposite of understanding? For this argument's sake, it's convincing. Convincing is the attempt to prove a singular reality, to prove that only one thing is true. Convincing is an attempt to be right, and as a result make the other person wrong. It rests on the assumption that there's only one correct viewpoint. And then my question is this supposed to be convincing? Further, convincing has one goal in mind, being right, and here's the unfortunate consequence of being right. The other person feels unseen and unheard, at which point most people become infuriated and combative, because it feels as if the other person does not accept your realness or worth. Feeling unseen and unheard makes connection impossible. Understanding two things are true and convincing one thing is true are diametrically opposed ways of approaching other people, so a powerful first step in any interaction is to notice which mode you're in. When you're in one thing is true mode, you're judgmental of and reactive to someone else's experience because it feels like an assault on your own truth. As a result, you will seek to prove your own point of view, which in turn makes the other person defensive because they need to uphold the realness of their experience. In one thing is true mode, exchanges escalate quickly. Each person thinks they're arguing about the content of the conversation when in fact they're trying to defend that they are a real, worthy person with a real, truthful experience. And again, is this convincing? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, moral politics.
Chapter 12. Regulation and the environment. A major aspect of nurturance is protection. Parents have to protect their children not just from the most obvious forms of crime and violence, but from less obvious forms of danger. Cigarette smoke, asbestos, and other toxic chemicals, lead paints, dangerous toys, harmful foods, cars without seatbelts, inflammable clothing, unscrupulous businessmen, and on and on. A truly caring, nurturant parent is vigilant when it comes to such everyday dangers. Government, seen as a nurturant parent, must similarly be vigilant about such everyday dangers to its citizens. Liberals conceptualize government regulation as the protection of those who cannot protect themselves, protection of citizens, workers, honest businessmen, and the environment against possible harm by unscrupulous or negligent businesses and individuals. Government regulation of business is there to be sure that businesses don't hurt or cheat anyone. Long experience tells us that citizens need such protection. Unscrupulous or careless businesses in America have a long history of putting their workers in danger, polluting the environment, producing dangerous products, and cheating their customers. The job of government regulation is to minimize this. Conservatives, however, do not conceptualize government regulation as protection. Why? Given conservative moral priorities and moral categories, they could not possibly conceptualize government regulation as protection. Who could it be protected against? Certainly not model conservative citizens, successful businessmen, from whom we have nothing to fear. In the system of conservative moral categories, government regulation falls under interference with the pursuit of self-interest by people trying to make a living, people using their self-discipline to become self-reliant, and, if possible, rich. These are the good people in our society. We want to encourage people like them, and it is wrong to put roadblocks in their way. The argument against environmental, worker safety, and product safety regulations is that they are too cumbersome and get in the way of doing business. Regulators are seen as stupid and corrupt, but conservatives don't just want to reform regulatory agencies to get rid of what is cumbersome while still protecting those who need protection. They want to get rid of regulations completely. Liberals are incredulous. Don't people have a right to clean air and water? Safe products, safe airlines, safe jobs? Shouldn't the environment be preserved for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? The liberal arguments never get heard by conservatives. They can't. The primary conservative moral categories filter out the liberal arguments. The primary conservative moral categorization, which is the political version of strict father morality, makes conservative businessmen into model citizens, and regulation into interference with them. The basis of the classification of successful businessmen as model citizens is very deep. As we have seen, it is the principle of the morality of reward and punishment, which is at the very heart of strict father morality. To place restrictions on that principle is to strike at the very heart of conservative ethics and the conservative way of life. Placing restrictions on moral people who are engaged in moral activities is immoral. That's why conservatives see government regulation as immoral. Once successful businessmen are categorized as model citizens, there is no possibility of seeing regulation as protection. The environment. Strict father morality includes the notion of the natural order of domination. God has dominion over human beings over nature, parents over children, and so on. By the metaphor that the moral order is the dominant order in nature, this arrangement is seen as a moral one, with the responsibility for protection and care going along with moral authority. But man's protection and care make sense only in the context of the primary given, the domination of man over nature according to man's priorities, which is taken to be both natural and moral. Newt Gingrich says all this straightforwardly. For me, any such effort at environmentalism begins with the premise that man dominates the planet and that we have an absolute obligation to minimize damage to the natural world. I am not a preservationist. It is impossible for us to be a dynamic species and still act as if we don't exist. References C1, Gingrich, page 195. It is assumed that being a dynamic species, one that figures out how to get what it wants and then goes for it, is naturally going to result in damage to the environment. You don't stop going after what you want, but you do try to minimize the damage. Strict father morality starts with the natural order, the domination of man over nature. It adds the morality of self-interest, in which the self-interest of all is maximized if we each seek our personal self-interest. It further adds the morality of reward and punishment as the basis of morality, which implies that it is immoral to stop individuals from working hard for the sake of profit. What all this adds up to is the view that nature is there as a resource to be used by man for his self-interest and profit. But, frugality being a virtue, the resource should be conserved as much as possible. We should use it for our individual aims, but not be too wasteful. Conservative environmentalism is conservation, hard-headed management with regard to costs and benefits. Gingrich, To Renew America, page 198. To get the best ecosystem for our buck, we should use decentralized and entrepreneurial strategies rather than command and control bureaucratic effort. As above, page 196. In short, there should be no attempts at top-down overall controls on what happens to an ecosystem. Our relationship to nature should work according to free market principles. Conservative environmentalism, the conservative view of man's relationship to nature, arises naturally from strict father morality. It is conceptualized and reasoned about in terms of a system of common metaphors that best fit the strict father view. Those metaphors are: nature is God's dominion, given to man to steward wisely. Nature is a resource for immediate human use. Nature is property for the use of the owner and for sale and purchase. Nature is a work of art for human appreciation. Nature is an adversary to be conquered and made to serve us. Nature is a wild animal to be tamed for our use. Nature is a mechanical system to be figured out and put to use. These modes of metaphorical thought allow us to comprehend and reason about nature in accord with what strict father morality tells us. The stewardship metaphor says that nature, by God's authority, is man's to use for whatever he wants, but he should use it sensibly and frugally. The resource metaphor, consider the term natural resources, assumes that whatever is in nature is, and should be, part of a human economic system. Its value is not intrinsic, but is determined by how useful it is to human beings, and how plentiful it is. If it is plentiful, then by the law of supply and demand, its value will be low. If it is rare, its value will be high. It also follows that certain aspects of nature will be categorized together in classes determined by human purposes. Salmon, for example, is classified in our economic system as a fish used for food. Its value is its use as a food. If salmon become extinct, it is no big deal because there are still many other fish that can be used as food, that serve the same function as a resource. The mere existence of salmon living in streams and spawning there is in itself of no value in the metaphor of nature as a resource. The property metaphor is, of course, not universal. There are cultures where the very idea of a person being able to own a tree or a forest or a mountain would be ludicrous. Under the property metaphor, nature is up for sale, just like a sofa or a car or a video game. Things in nature, forests, lakes, volcanoes, canyons, can be put to any use the owner wants, or even destroyed if that is the owner's wish. The value of nature, in this metaphor, is as a commodity, and it fluctuates with local tastes and market conditions. In this metaphor, streams, lakes, and valleys have no inherent value, only market value. The work of art metaphor assigns nature an aesthetic value, dependent on human aesthetic sensibilities. A Grand Canyon or a Yosemite or a whale takes on value because of how it is aesthetically judged. A desert ecology or a homely newt will, for most people, have low aesthetic value. The adversary metaphor makes the conquest of nature noble, and man's dominion of nature something worked for and therefore earned and deserved. It assumes an alienation of man from nature, a separateness that can be overcome only through domination. It assumes that nature, in an unconquered state, is dangerous to man, and that man must dominate nature to survive. The continuing and expanding domination of nature becomes, by this metaphor, a form of self-defense and a moral enterprise. The wild animal metaphor, again, sees nature as alien to man and dangerous, but of possible economic use. The taming and domination of nature thus becomes a noble enterprise, and a profitable one. The mechanical system metaphor characterizes our understanding of the role of science vis-à-vis nature. Science is seen as having the job of figuring out what makes nature tick and what nature's internal workings are. The purpose is control, so that we can use nature for our purposes. Nurturant parent morality sees our relation to nature in a very different light. The natural world is what gives us life, what makes all of life possible, and what sustains us. Nature has provided and continues to provide. Our relationship with nature is as the recipient of nurturance, and as such it involves attachment, inherent value, gratitude, responsibility, respect, interdependence, love, adoration, and continuing commitment. This view of nature is conceptualized using the following metaphors. Nature is a mother who provides for us. Nature is a whole, of which we are inseparable parts. Nature is a divine being, to be revered and respected. Nature is a living organism, whose needs must be met if it is to survive. Nature is a home, to be maintained and kept clean. Nature is a victim of injury, who has been harmed and needs to be healed. The nature as mother metaphor sees nature as nurturer and provider. The normal relationship of a child to a nurturant mother is one of attachment and love. Something of continuing inherent value that cannot be bought and sold, a relationship that gives meaning to one's life. One's moral attitude to a nurturant mother is one of gratitude, responsibility, and respect. You have a responsibility to provide for her needs to the best of your ability. You accord her dignity. You show your gratitude in your deeds. The relationship is one of mutuality, of interdependence, and it is not a weak or temporary relationship. It is a continuing commitment. The whole-part metaphor stresses the attachment, mutuality, and interdependence of the relationship. The divine being, earth as goddess metaphor, focuses on our dependence, our respect, and our adoration. The living organism metaphor, as in the Gaia hypothesis, focuses on interdependence and the fact that ecosystems have needs that must be met if they are to survive. The home metaphor stresses that the earth is where we live, that it is finite, that it is a place of nurturance and security, that it has to be maintained, that it has to be kept clean. It also focuses on the fact that we are attached to our homes, that there is something about our home that has inherent value, that a home has value far beyond its market value. The injury metaphor focuses on the fragility of nature and the harm it has already undergone. It implies that nature cannot sustain continuing damage if the natural world as we know it is to survive, and that healing is necessary. These are the metaphors for nature given highest priority in nurturant parent morality. Some of the metaphors used in the conservative view of nature also fit nurturant parent morality, but they have subservient status in the system, and their meaning is radically changed by that status. Take, for example, the resource metaphor. This moral system assumes not the domination of man over nature, but the interdependence of man and nature. Nature is a resource to someone nurtured by nature, but the nurturer must be nurtured too. We must take care of the earth. This entails the notion of sustainability. Nurturance requires interdependence if it is to be sustained. The same is true of our relationship to nature. The resource metaphor, in the context of the nurturance metaphor, implies sustainability, a central ecological concept. Yes, nature is a resource, but it must be a sustainable resource. Yes, natural resources have economic value, but not just economic value. Their economic value must be determined within the context of the system of inherent value I have just described. Since nurturance is an aesthetic experience, the work of art metaphor applies, but in a very different way. In nurturance, the aesthetic experience is not separate from the experience of nurturance. Thus, the aesthetic values are not separate from all the other values entailed by nurturance. Example, respect, attachment, continuing commitment. The aesthetic value of nature is, therefore, not just seeing a pretty scene when you take a walk in the woods. It is not like having a picture of the woods on the wall. The aesthetic experience is part of nurturing. The mechanical system metaphor, too, takes on a different meaning in nurturant parent morality. Discovering important things about a nurturant relationship that you are in is not separable from the nurturance itself. In a moral system where nurturance is the highest value, discovery is in the service of nurturance. If you live by nurturant parent morality, then scientific discoveries are nurturant values in themselves. They also take on importance when they are in the service of nurturance. For example, when they cure us of illness or allow us to communicate with friends and relatives who live far away. From the perspective of nurturance, the stewardship metaphor takes on a very different meaning. Stewardship is not in the service of domination, but in the service of healing and sustaining nature, so that it can continue to nurture us, and so that we can continue to reap all the benefits of being in a two-way nurturant relationship with the natural world. Given these very different moral conceptions of the relationship between human beings and nature, it should come as no surprise that liberals and conservatives have many opposing views on environmental policy. Take the Environmental Protection Agency. From a liberal perspective, the mission of the EPA is to serve the protective function of nurturance. Its function is both to protect the citizenry from environmental dangers and to protect the environment itself. It does its job through the enforcement of environmental laws and through the monitoring of environmental indexes, for example, the monitoring of air pollution. Part of its job is to regulate industries that produce pollution, like steel mills and power plants, to make sure they conform to environmental standards. Another part of its job is to enforce the Endangered Species Act. Still, another part of its job is to study how to protect ecosystems. For example, wetlands. Once laws are passed, it decides how best to implement them. From a liberal point of view, Such an agency is absolutely needed. A part of healing nature is cleaning up our rivers and streams so that fish can live in them and plants can thrive on their banks, and so that they can be used as much as possible as sources for drinking water. This serves the purpose of both nurturing nature as well as nurturing people by supplying clean water to drink. Since the EPA was formed, its regulations have played a major role in cleaning up sources of drinking water. Liberals are aghast that conservatives have proposed legislation to cut the EPA's enforcement power so drastically that it could no longer stop industries from polluting drinking water sources. Conservatives want to eliminate the EPA on the grounds that government should encourage and reward free enterprise, not constrain and punish it. This fits the conservative view of nature as being there to serve private interests. Solutions to as many problems as possible should come out of free enterprise solutions that reward self-discipline and enterprise, rather than out of government-imposed constraints that punish enterprising companies through regulation. Or take the issue of old-growth forests and the spotted owl. Old-growth forests are not merely many hundreds of years old. They are remarkable ecosystems with a unique variety and large number of smaller plants, insects, birds, and animals that fit together in an extraordinary complex ecosystem like no other. 90% of America's old-growth forests have already been destroyed by logging. Only 10% are left, and logging companies want to cut them down. They can never be replaced. Nurturant parent morality imposes a view of nature that assigns inherent value to old-growth forests. Their value is not in what you can sell their lumber for, or in how pretty they look, but in what they are. They are a unique form of nature that has almost been destroyed. A nurturant morality demands that they be protected. Now it happens that there is no law on the books to protect old-growth forests for their own sake, but there is a law called the Endangered Species Act, which forbids the destruction of the habitat of a species that is on the EPA's list of endangered species. As it happens, there is an endangered species on that list that lives in old-growth forests, and only old-growth forests, the spotted owl. Save the spotted owl, and you save old-growth forests. Of course, the nurturant parent view of nature also assigns inherent value to endangered species, and hence to the spotted owl. But there is far more involved here than just the spotted owl. Liberals, naturally, are for the strict enforcement of the Endangered Species Act and the consequences of saving the remaining old-growth forests. Conservatives are furious, and they should be, given their worldview. The most central features of strict father morality are being challenged. The morality of reward and punishment. The very basis of strict father morality is being challenged in two forms. The first is a challenge to unrestricted free enterprise, the unrestricted freedom to seek private reward for your labor and investments. If investors in the logging companies cannot realize expected profits on their investments, then that freedom has been limited. The second is a challenge to the unrestricted use of private property, the unrestricted freedom to do whatever you want with the fruits of your labor, namely your property. Logging companies own some of these old-growth forests. If they cannot cut them down for profit, then restrictions have been placed on the use of private property. In addition, the very moral order has been challenged, the idea that man, by God's will, has dominion over nature, and that nature is a resource for man's use. Loggers, ordinary, hard-working, moral, law-abiding folks, may lose their source of income. What is more important, people or owls? Common sense, the common sense of strict father morality, says people. One of the common arguments the conservatives use against environmental regulation is that it can be done better by the use of the market. One proposal is the sale of pollution rights. Allot to each industry the right to pollute a certain amount. Then, if it pollutes less than that amount, allow it to sell its unused portion to another industry. That gives industries an incentive to pollute less so that they can sell their pollution rights. Done cleverly, its advocates claim, this market system can reduce industrial pollution. Perhaps so, but that would not address the liberals' environmental concerns. Liberals conceptualize nature in very different metaphors than do conservatives. The liberal metaphors assign intrinsic value to aspects of nature. The market does not and cannot. Market solutions may help in many cases, but they cannot address the deepest of liberals' concerns. When one steps back for a moment and takes a look at conservative and liberal moral systems, it becomes apparent that the issue is not people versus owls or market forces versus the EPA, but two utterly opposed moral visions of the proper relation of man to nature. The issue is a huge one. Which moral view is to dominate? Not just on environmental questions, but overall in our culture and our politics.
And that was Chapter 12 of Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think by Dr. George Lakoff. And everything in this chapter was contrived and arbitrary. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that subjective individualism is your idea.